Hello, my name is Phillips-Cary, and this is my Module 6 Data Collection, Formative, and Summative Assessments. So, when we think about summative assessments, we immediately think of the practices that we do every single day within our classes, between practice worksheets, quizzes, tests, papers, etc. So, what we are looking at here is existing records that we already have made as a teacher in order to see how students score on them. Remember that formative assessments are do nows, exit tickets, practice worksheets, homework assignments, etc. Summative assessments are teacher-made tests or quizzes, and we can sometimes even include standardized tests in here in order to see how our progression from what we made as teacher derived formative and summative assessments to a standardized test would be. But for the sake of that, we're not going to be talking about that. We're only going to be talking about just the formative and summative assessments that teachers make. These are primarily used to determine an area of focus in the curricula that are made from scratch and correlated against another to determine the growth over time within a certain topic. So teachers can easily assess their curricula. They can drive a lesson based off of the goals and objectives that the curricula is discussing. And then they are responding to a particular subject in that curricula in order to see if the goals are met based off of the formative assessments and the summative assessments. For example, a couple weeks ago, I gave practice worksheets on the properties of matter and the structures of matter with kinetic molecular theory. Okay, so basically all I did was just, teach a lesson on that, give a practice worksheet, see how students were interacting with that practice, scaffolded it for some students, had some interventions with some other students to see if they were able to, articulate and actually meet the target that I wanted to from that lesson. And then a couple of weeks down the line, I gave a quiz and a test based off of that on solid, liquids, and gases, and interacted with the kinetic molecular theory to see from the practice assignments to the test, were students able to meet the objective. And this is a normal every single day practice between the teacher and with them using the curricula. So it's nothing new. It's stuff that you normally do within your classroom setting. So, is it qualitative or is it quantitative? Well, formative and summative assessments are a quantitative approach. So it's usually referenced by a number score or a overall grade based off of a test. Remember that formative assessments are used to primarily see where the students are struggling and to see if students misunderstood anything. Summative assessments are used in order to determine whether or not the objective was met and determine if the target from the curricula was actually, achieved by that individual student. However, there are some questions that do need to be answered. So what questions do get answered from these types of data collection techniques? Well, did you meet the curriculum's goal? Were all the students within that class able to meet the current goal that was set out by the teacher? Was there an aspect of a concept from the unit topic that was missing, or the students did not really fully understand? For this, you could singular out certain questions from your assessment to see what concept from that unit students really did not understand or missed entirely. Are the students able to comprehend that topic? So based off of that score, you could average students' test grades in order to see, is that student or are all the students essentially meeting that learning target for that specific topic? And then does the concept being taught need to be revisited or allow student comprehension? So would the entire concept itself need to be revisited based off of where students are currently scoring on that current curriculum or test subject or that learning objective? So let's talk about the validity, reliability, and ethical perspectives. So we're talking about validity. Due to the teacher being the maker and having the power in their hands to be making these formative and summative assessments, it allows the teacher to determine struggles and growth for each individual student. So students can correlate the data from whether they are able to fully understand from the formative assessment to the summative assessment whether that is being met. It also allows the teacher to determine which learning targets from the curricula are challenging for the students to comprehend. So that way the student can either revise or restructure that current topic so that way the students are able to meet that learning objective in future years. So we need to also talk about the formative versus summative. So we can determine the growth of the students from the practice assessment to the summative assessment. So are the students actually growing, or are they not really growing at all, where the formative assessment was really great, but the summative assessment was not so great? So are we structuring our assessments and correlating it between the types of questions that are being asked? And then during the formative assessment, it allows the teacher to see if the topics need to be retaught or revisited before a summative assessment. So we use formative assessment data to see if students are meeting a learning objective. And then the summative assessment is the overall, like, are students actually articulating and meeting the goal? And if not, then we didn't do our job within the formative assessment to pick up those key aspects of what was missing when the students were actually being tested during that formative assessment. Reliability. So data comes from teacher-driven reports. So we need to make sure that the teacher can correlate data based on how the class is doing overall. So even though a student may be not doing well, we need to also see if this whole class as well is doing well. So if one student is not meeting the learning objective, the teacher can produce intervention strategies to scaffold that information for the student. But if the whole class is not doing well as a whole, then the whole topic needs to be retaught. And then we also need to think about, is the teacher-made practice and assessment actually allowing the students to meet the objective? So the teacher has to determine whether or not their own teaching style and their own format of teaching the topic is going to allow the students to meet that objective. It can all be selective based on how the teacher can correspond and correlate their own behavior in order to have that teacher and student relationship, which can also inhibit some bias on the data, but it's also crucially important to see how the classroom environment and the classroom dynamic is actually happening, so that way the students can actually meet the objective. I mean, you also have to finally ask yourself where, if you had a teacher that you really didn't like, are you actually going to want to learn the content and be there and be present and actually want to engage in the content to be able to, first of all, do well in the formative assessment and then overall do well in the summative assessment. So the classroom and the teacher-student dynamic need to be also there. So there could be some biases in the data based on how the teacher and student relationship actually is. So is the data going to be reliable if that relationship isn't positive and is in fact actually negative? Then last but not least, let's talk about some ethics. So this may not be what is known as a normal teaching practice. Okay, what I mean by that is we, do this normally and it may not be accepted. So therefore the data could be completely unreliable and ethically not correct because we do this every single day. We do formative assessments with students to see if they're meeting the learning target and succeeding with the learning target that we have. We assess students based summatively to see if they are meeting the curricula that we have set out for them. So some data and some researchers may consider this test score to not be full data and the norm because we need more than just that current correlation between formative and summative assessments. However, when we are reporting this data, we need to make sure that if we are using the students' individual grades, that we get permission from both the principal and have parental consent. Individual grades are selective on students meeting the objective. So simply this data can single out a single student based on them performing well or not well academically, and then whether or not they are doing well and poorly in the class. So if we're just singling out how one student is achieving the data and we fully put that on the report, it is not ethically strong, and it could therefore point out that a student out of everyone in the class is performing academically lower than their peers. Another thing that we need to consider is when we're using average test grades or average grades for formative assessments. We still need to ensure that we're getting permission from the principal, but the parents aren't really informed about the data collection. So it's up to the discretion of whether the teacher wants to have that parental consent and whether or not the teacher should allow the parents to know that their student or their child's grades are being reported at all. And then if we're using the class's average, typically classes at the end of the day perform academically better than in the beginning of the day. So we need to also consider whether or not we have teacher bias, because we can revise and redo and just do better at the end of the day because we've taught the lesson a couple times over rather than the beginning of the day. So there could be some classroom bias in there, and that could draw some ethical concerns on whether or not we are being 100% fully transparent and teaching the exact same way with the lesson. So making sure that we are ethically teaching the exact same way and also ensuring that our data correlates between the beginning of the day class periods and towards the end of the day class periods. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you may be choosing this as one of your data collection techniques. However, I do want to say that this is not enough information just for your data collection techniques. And so if you're doing a pre and post test, which also follows under this type of strategy that you're using to collect, make sure that you're also using another data technique, because it's not enough information to fully prove your points within your action research project, because it's not considered different testing or different data collection practice. This is what we do on the everyday norm. So you need to think a little bit outside the box on how you're going to use others and different data collection techniques in order to see if your correlation between your independent and your dependent variable is actually valid. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.